I was filling my coffee pot when the tap coughed twice and died. For a moment I just stood there in my kitchen, watching the last dribble spiral down the drain, thinking maybe the pressure had dropped or some valve needed adjusting. I twisted the handle back and forth. Nothing. I walked to the bathroom and tried that faucet. Dry. The toilet tank sat half empty from this morning's flush, and when I lifted the lid on the washing machine I'd started before breakfast, the drum held my shirts in a pathetic inch of gray water that had stopped mid-cycle. My name is Kyle Owens, and I've spent 35 years studying how water moves through rock and soil and aquifer systems across the American Southwest. I retired from the USGS 18 months ago and bought this property outside Kingman, Arizona, precisely because I understood its bones. The land sat at the rural edge of a development called Desert Vista Estates, a collection of about 40 homes clustered where the high desert started giving way to actual mountains. The previous owner had run cattle here in the 70s, back when this was all open range, and the property carried water rights that went back to 1952. I'd done my homework. I knew what I was buying. I walked outside into the November morning, which was cool and bright, the way Arizona mornings are before the sun gets serious about cooking everything. My property stretched across 87 acres, most of it creosote and scattered juniper, with the house sitting on a slight rise that gave me a view all the way to the Hualapai Mountains. The newer development homes clustered to the north and east, cookie-cutter ranchers on 1-acre lots that the developer had carved out and sold starting in 2008, right before the housing market collapsed. They'd incorporated as an HOA to maintain the private roads and manage the community well that served everyone out here. The county water lines didn't extend this far, and drilling individual wells cost a fortune in this geology, so the shared system made sense. I'd paid my connection fee when I bought the place, and my water bill came to $63 a month, which seemed reasonable enough, except now I had no water and I hadn't received any notice about maintenance or shutoffs. I climbed into my truck and drove the quarter-mile of dirt road to the well house, which sat in a small fenced compound near the center of the development. The building was just a concrete block structure with a metal roof, housing the pump and pressure tanks and distribution controls. As I got closer, I saw a shiny new padlock hanging from the gate chain and a laminated notice zip tied to the fence. I parked and walked up to read it. The notice was printed in large, bold letters. Water access restricted to dues current members in good standing. HOA Board, Order 2024-16. Questions, contact Brenda Patterson, HOA President. Brenda. Of course it was Brenda. I'd crossed paths with Brenda Patterson exactly 3 times since moving here, and each encounter had been a small masterclass in petty bureaucratic tyranny. The first time was at a neighborhood meeting where she'd spent 20 minutes explaining why my fence posts needed to be exactly 8 feet apart instead of the 10 feet I'd used, citing some covenant restriction that apparently applied to properties built before the HOA even existed. The second time, she'd left a formal complaint in my mailbox because I'd parked my truck facing the wrong direction in my own driveway. The third time involved a heated argument about whether I needed to submit architectural plans to paint my own front door. I'd stopped attending the meetings after that. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the notice. Brenda answered on the third ring, her voice carrying that particular tight cheerfulness that people use when they're expecting confrontation and looking forward to it. Brenda, this is Kyle Owens. I just discovered I have no water and there's a padlock on the well house. What's going on? Oh, Kyle. She drew my name out like she was addressing a particularly slow child. Yes, well, as you can see from the posted notice, water access is currently restricted to members in good standing. According to our records, you haven't paid your HOA dues in 7 months. I pay my water bill every month. I have the canceled checks. The water fee and the HOA dues are separate charges, Kyle. The dues cover road maintenance, common area upkeep, administrative costs, and covenant enforcement. They're clearly outlined in the CC and RS that you received when you purchased your property. I closed my eyes and counted to 5. I'd seen those covenants. They'd been drafted in 2009 when the developer set up the HOA, and they included a long list of restrictions that mostly applied to the newer development parcels. My land predated all of it. I'd bought it as an existing non-conforming parcel, grandfathered under the county regulations that existed before the subdivision. Brenda, my property isn't subject to those covenants. My deed predates your HOA by 40 years. That's not how our legal counsel interprets it. Once you connected to community utilities and started using our roads, you became subject to our governance. If you have concerns, you're welcome to submit them in writing to the board. In the meantime, the dues are $1,200, plus a $300 administrative fee for late payment and a $200 reconnection fee once you're current. I'll email you the invoice. You can't just cut off someone's water. There are laws about this. We're not cutting off anything. We're simply restricting access to community resources for members who aren't meeting their obligations. It's all perfectly legal. I've been assured of that by our attorney. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in the desert morning, staring at the padlock and feeling the old familiar anger starting to build. Not the hot kind that makes you do something stupid, but the cold kind that sharpens your thinking. I'd spent 3 decades working with water districts and county administrators and state regulators across 8 western states. I'd been involved in aquifer studies and rights adjudications and interstate compact negotiations. I knew water law the way a surgeon knows anatomy, and I knew Brenda Patterson was about to learn a very expensive lesson about seniority and easements and what happens when you lock a hydrologist away from the water that legally belongs to him. But first, I needed to verify something. I drove back home and went straight to my office, which was really just the spare bedroom where I kept my filing cabinets and desk. I pulled the property survey I'd commissioned during escrow, along with the title report and the water rights documentation I'd received from the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Then, I spread a USGS topographic map across the desk and started marking elevations and property lines. The geology here was fairly straightforward once you understood it. The community well tapped into the Sacramento Valley aquifer at about 380 feet, pulling from a confined layer of saturated alluvium and fractured volcanic rock. The well house sat on what used to be HOA common property, a 2-acre parcel that the developer had dedicated for utilities. But the water itself moved through underground channels that followed the natural topography, flowing generally northwest to southeast through a series of interconnected fractures in the bedrock. And those fractures ran directly beneath my property. I'd noticed it when I first reviewed the geological surveys, but hadn't thought much about it because everyone was getting their water without problems. Now I pulled out the original easement documents from 1952 when the cattle rancher who'd owned my land had granted distribution rights to 3 neighboring properties. Those easements had been expanded in 1987 to include several more parcels, and then again in 2009 when the developer set up the community system. Each time, the easement language stayed the same. The distribution pipes and infrastructure could cross my property, but the underlying water rights remained attached to my deed as senior appropriations predating everything else. I traced the pipe routes on the survey map. The main distribution line ran from the well house southeast for about 200 yards, then crossed onto my property and split into 3 lateral lines that served different sections of the development. Every single home in Desert Vista Estates received its water through pipes that crossed my land. The easement gave them the right to maintain and access those pipes, but it didn't give them the right to control who received water or to charge access fees to the property owner who held the senior rights. Brenda had just locked me out of a well system that couldn't legally operate without my cooperation. I spent the next hour confirming the details, checking the recorded documents against the survey, and making notes on a yellow legal pad. Then, I called the Mojave County Water Resources Office and asked to speak with someone about a potential water rights dispute. They transferred me 3 times before I ended up with a woman named Jennifer Crane, who introduced herself as the County Water Rights Administrator. "Mr. Owens, I'm familiar with the Desert Vista system," she said. Her voice was professional but warm, the kind that suggested she actually cared about solving problems rather than just pushing paper. "What's the nature of your dispute?" I explained the situation, keeping it factual and chronological. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "They locked you out of the well house?" "This morning, there's a padlock on the gate and a notice saying only current HOA members can access water." "And your property holds senior rights from 1952? "Correct. Plus, the distribution easement runs through my parcel. I have the recorded documents. Another pause. Mr. Owens, I'm going to need to review the actual filings, but if what you're telling me is accurate, this is a fairly significant issue. You can't just deny water access to a senior rights holder, and you definitely can't do it to the property owner whose land hosts the distribution infrastructure. Do you have copies of your deed and the water rights certificates? I can scan and email them to you within the hour. Please do that. And I'll need the legal descriptions of the easements and any agreements between your property and the HOA. I'm going to open a formal inquiry into this. In the meantime, do you have any immediate needs? Emergency water access? I have about 40 gallons in my hot water heater and another 20 in some camping jugs. I can make that last a few days if I'm careful. All right, I'll try to move quickly on this. These situations can get complicated, but the law is pretty clear about senior rights. Give me until tomorrow afternoon, and I'll call you with next steps. I thanked her and hung up, then spent the next 90 minutes scanning documents and sending them to her email address. When I was done, I made a sandwich and ate it standing at my kitchen window, looking out at the desert and thinking about all the invisible water flowing beneath my feet. Most people don't understand that water is constantly moving underground, sliding through pores and fractures and ancient river channels that existed millions of years before humans showed up and started drawing lines on maps. We treat property like it's static and fixed, but water doesn't care about our boundaries. It follows gravity and geology, and it's been doing that since long before Arizona was a state, or Kingman was a town, or Brenda Patterson decided she had the authority to lock my gate. My phone rang at 4:30. It was Jennifer. Mr. Owens, I've reviewed your documents, and I've also pulled the HOA's original water service agreements and the county records for the well permit. You were right about everything. Your property holds senior rights with a priority date of April 1952, and the distribution easement explicitly crosses your land. The HOA can't legally exclude you from water access, and frankly, they're operating the entire system on your sufferance. So what happens now? I'm going to send a formal notice to the HOA board requiring them to restore your water access immediately. If they don't comply within 24 hours, I can involve the county attorney's office and potentially the court. I'm also opening a review of their overall water service arrangements, because there are some questions about whether they're operating within their permitted capacity and whether they've properly documented the chain of rights from your easement to their current users. Will that affect the other residents? Not in terms of their actual water access, no, but it might affect how the HOA is allowed to charge fees and manage the system. The thing is, Mr. Owens, your senior rights mean you have first call on that aquifer. If there's ever a shortage or a dispute about allocation, your needs get met before anyone else's. The HOA can't change that by passing board resolutions or charging dues. I'm not trying to hurt my neighbors, I said. I just want my water turned back on and to be left alone. I understand, but sometimes these things need to be clarified formally so everyone understands the legal reality. I'll send that notice today. You should hear from the HOA within 48 hours. She was wrong about that. I heard from the HOA within 2 hours. Brenda showed up at my front door just after 6, accompanied by 2 other people I vaguely recognized from neighborhood meetings. One was a man in his 60s named Frank Dennison, who served as the HOA treasurer, and the other was a younger woman named Patricia something or other who I thought might be the secretary. Brenda was holding a folder full of papers, and her expression suggested she'd just bitten into a lemon. "Kyle, we need to talk about this complaint you filed with the county." I didn't file a complaint. I contacted the water rights administrator to inquire about my legal status. That's my right as a property owner. You're trying to interfere with how this community manages its resources. We have 43 families depending on that well system, and we can't have individuals deciding they don't need to follow the rules. The rules don't apply to my property, Brenda. My water rights predate your HOA by 50 years. Frank stepped forward, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "Kyle, look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Nobody wants to create problems. If there's a dispute about the dues, maybe we can work something out, some kind of payment plan or reduced fee or something." "There's no dispute about dues," I said. "My property isn't subject to your covenants, and you don't have the legal authority to deny me water access. The county administrator is sending you a formal notice about that tonight. Patricia spoke up for the first time. Our attorney says we have every right to restrict access to community resources for non-compliant members. Your attorney is wrong. And if they actually reviewed the property records and the water rights documentation, they'd tell you that. Brenda's face was getting red. This is ridiculous. You're being deliberately difficult because you don't want to pay your fair share like everyone else. We've been more than patient with you, but if you're going to threaten the entire community's water supply over $1,000, then maybe you should consider whether you belong here at all. I'm not threatening anything. You're the one who put a padlock on the well house. Because you weren't paying your dues. Because you demanded money I don't legally owe. And when I didn't pay it, you decided to hold my water access hostage. That's not community management, Brenda. That's extortion. The word hung in the air between us. Frank and Patricia both took a small step back, but Brenda just stared at me with her mouth compressed into a tight line. We're going to fight this, she said. We have legal counsel, and we have the support of every homeowner in this development. If you want to be that person who makes life difficult for 43 families, that's your choice. But don't expect anyone here to thank you for it. They left, and I stood on my porch watching their car drive away down the dirt road, trailing a plume of dust that hung in the evening air. The sun was dropping toward the mountains, turning everything gold and orange and purple the way it does out here when the light hits the desert at the right angle. I'd moved to this place because I wanted quiet and space and the chance to live somewhere I could see the sky and understand the land. Instead, I was apparently going to spend the next few months fighting with people who thought rules were more important than reality. I went inside and ate a light dinner, using as little water as possible. The 40 gallons in my hot water heater and the camping water would last about a week if I was careful, but that assumed this situation resolved quickly. If it dragged out, I'd need to start buying bottled water or hauling it from town, which was a 15-mile drive each way. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was sitting on top of an aquifer that held millions of gallons of water, with senior legal rights to use it, and I was rationing my drinking supply like a backpacker in the Sonoran Desert. Jennifer called again the next morning. I sent the formal notice to the HOA last night via certified mail and email. I also spoke with their registered agent who confirmed receipt. They have 24 hours to restore your water access or provide legal justification for the denial. Brenda showed up at my house last night with 2 board members. She made it pretty clear they plan to fight this. That's their right, but they'll lose. The law is unambiguous on senior water rights, and they're operating on your property under an easement that doesn't grant them control over who receives water. The most they can do is file for a formal adjudication, which will cost them tens of thousands of dollars and end with the same result. What about the other residents? Are they going to end up without water because of this? No, the easement protects their access as long as the system is operating properly. But the HOA may need to restructure how they charge fees and manage the well. Right now they're treating it like a private utility that they control, but legally it's a shared resource with you holding senior rights. That's a distinction that matters. I don't want to be the guy who destroys the neighborhood association. I just want my water. I understand. But sometimes clarifying these legal issues early prevents bigger problems down the road. What if there's a drought and the aquifer levels drop? What if the HOA decides to sell access to outside users or commercial operations? Your senior rights protect you and indirectly all your neighbors. It's worth establishing that clearly. She was right, of course. I'd seen enough water wars in my career to know that ambiguity always led to conflict eventually. Better to sort it out now while the stakes were relatively low. The deadline passed with no response from the HOA. Jennifer called the county attorney's office, which sent its own letter threatening legal action if the water wasn't restored. That got a response, but not the one anyone expected. On the 3rd day, Frank Dennison showed up at my door alone, looking tired and uncomfortable. "Kyle, can we talk? Just you and me, off the record?" I invited him in and offered him coffee, which he declined. We sat in my living room, and he spent a long moment just looking around at my bookshelves and the geological maps on the walls. "Brenda's out of control," he said finally. "I've been on the board for 8 years, and I've watched her turn into someone who thinks every disagreement is a personal attack. The thing with your property, she took it to the board as a routine covenant enforcement issue, and most of us just rubber stamped it because that's what we usually do. We didn't know about your water rights or the easement situation. Did you know she was going to lock the well house? No. She did that on her own authority as president. When I found out, I told her it was a bad idea, but she said our lawyer approved it. Now I'm not sure that's true. I've tried to reach our attorney to ask about it, and he's not returning calls. Jennifer Crane thinks you're going to lose if this goes to court. I know. I talked to her yesterday. Kyle, I'm asking you, is there some way we can resolve this without involving lawyers and judges? The HOA doesn't have deep pockets. If we end up in litigation, the legal fees alone could bankrupt us. And if we lose, which it sounds like we will, the county might restructure how we're allowed to operate the well. That could mean higher fees for everyone, or losing our ability to self-manage, or who knows what. What do you want me to do, Frank? I don't know. I guess I'm trying to understand what you want. Brenda keeps saying you're just being difficult, but I get the feeling there's more to it than that. I took a breath and tried to organize my thoughts. I moved here because I wanted peace and space. I don't care about your HOA politics. I don't care about covenant enforcement or board meetings or whether people park their trucks facing north or south. I bought this property specifically because it had good water rights and enough room that I wouldn't have neighbors breathing down my neck. Then Brenda decided I needed to pay dues I don't owe, and when I didn't, she cut off my water. That's not governance, Frank. That's bullying. I hear you and I'm sorry. But what happens now? Do we end up in court? Do you shut down the well? Do 40 families end up without water because Brenda and I and a couple other board members made a stupid decision? I'm not shutting down anything. The easement protects your access. But you need to understand that I'm not subject to your covenants, and I'm not paying fees for an association I never joined. My property is grandfathered. It always has been. Frank nodded slowly. Okay, that's fair. What if we formally acknowledge that in writing? Some kind of agreement that recognizes your senior rights and exempts you from the HOA dues and covenants. Would that solve this? It would be a start, but I also need the water turned back on today, and I need assurance this won't happen again the next time Brenda decides I'm not being cooperative enough. I can get the water turned on today. I have a key to the well house. As for Brenda, that's trickier. She's the president, and she has support from some of the other residents. There's a group that thinks you're trying to get special treatment and that we should fight this. Then, let them vote on it at your next meeting. Explain the legal situation and let the membership decide if they want to spend their reserve fund on a lawsuit they'll lose. That could work, Frank said. He stood up and offered his hand. I'll get the water restored this morning, and I'll call an emergency meeting for next week. I can't promise how it'll go, but at least people will hear the facts. I shook his hand, and he left. 2 hours later, I heard the pipes in my walls shudder and groan as pressure returned to the system. I turned on the kitchen tap and watched clear cold water pour into the sink, and I felt a tension release that I hadn't entirely realized I'd been carrying. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center, which was just a glorified pole barn that the developer had built to satisfy some county requirement about common spaces. I hadn't planned to attend, but Jennifer suggested it might help if I was there to answer questions directly. People are scared, she said when she called to discuss the meeting. They don't understand water law, and they're hearing rumors that you're going to shut off their access or charge them fees or do something that'll hurt their property values. If you're willing to show up and just explain the reality calmly, it might diffuse some of the tension. You think they'll listen? Some will. Others won't, because they've already decided you're the enemy. But the reasonable people in the middle need to hear from you directly. So I went. The meeting was scheduled for 7, and I arrived at 10 after to find the barn packed with at least 60 people, including children. Someone had set up folding chairs in rows, and Brenda was standing at the front with Frank and Patricia and 2 other board members I didn't recognize. The crowd was loud, everyone talking at once, and the mood felt angry and scared in equal measure. Brenda spotted me and her expression hardened. She banged a gavel on the podium and called the meeting to order, and the noise gradually subsided into a tense, watchful silence. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Brenda began. As you know, we're here to discuss a situation involving Kyle Owens and his property. Mr. Owens has filed a complaint with the county claiming that he's not subject to our HOA covenants and that he has some kind of special water rights that supersede our community agreements. The county has threatened legal action if we don't accommodate his demands, and the board needs to decide how to respond. She made it sound like I was some kind of outside agitator trying to shake down the neighborhood. Yeah, I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my mouth shut and waited. Frank stood up and cleared his throat. Brenda, that's not quite accurate. Mr. Owens didn't file a complaint. He contacted the county water rights administrator to clarify his legal status after we locked him out of the well house, and according to the county, he does have senior water rights that predate our HOA. The administrator has been pretty clear that we're on shaky legal ground here. That's her interpretation, Brenda snapped. Our attorney has a different view. Our attorney won't return my calls, Frank said. I've tried reaching him 5 times this week and he's not responding. I'm not sure he actually gave us good advice on this. A murmur ran through the crowd, Someone in the back shouted, "What does this mean for our water? Are we going to lose access?" Frank held up his hands. No, nobody's losing access to water. The easement that runs through Mr. Owens's property protects our distribution system. But the county is saying we need to clarify the legal arrangements, and we may need to change how we operate the well. Why should we have to change anything? A woman in the front row demanded. We were here first. We built this community. He moved in later and now he's trying to take over. That's not true, I said, standing up. The crowd turned to look at me, and I saw a mix of curiosity and hostility on their faces. My property has been here since 1948. The HOA was created in 2009. I'm not trying to take over anything. I just want to be left alone. Then why are you causing problems? The woman shot back. I'm not causing problems. The board locked me out of the well house and demanded I pay dues for an HOA I never joined. When I asked the county to clarify my legal status, they confirmed what I already knew. My property isn't subject to your covenants, and I have senior water rights. That's not me making trouble. That's just the law. So what do you want? Someone else called out. Are you going to charge us to use your property? Are you going to shut down the well? No, the easement protects your access, and I have no interest in shutting anything down. I want exactly what I had before. Water service for a reasonable monthly fee, and no one telling me how to run my property. That's it. Brenda jumped in. This is ridiculous. He's acting like he's some kind of lord who owns the water, and we're all his tenants. We have 43 families here who pay their dues and follow the rules, and now we're supposed to make special exceptions because Mr. Owens doesn't think the rules apply to him. The rules don't apply to him, Jennifer said from the doorway. I turned and saw her standing at the entrance wearing jeans and a work jacket, her county ID badge clipped to her belt. Sorry I'm late. I thought it might help if someone from the county was here to explain the legal situation. She walked to the front of the room, and Brenda looked like she wanted to object but couldn't figure out how. Jennifer faced the crowd and spoke in that calm, professional voice that somehow made everyone pay attention. My name is Jennifer Crane, and I'm the Water Rights Administrator for Mojave County. I've been reviewing the situation here at Desert Vista, and I want to make sure everyone understands the facts. Mr. Owens's property holds water rights with a priority date of April 1952. That makes them senior to every other water claim in this area. The community well system operates under a permit that was issued in 2009, which makes it junior to Mr. Owens's rights. Additionally, the distribution infrastructure that serves all of your homes runs through an easement on Mr. Owens's property. He granted that easement and allows you to use it, but he retains ownership of the land and holds senior rights to the water. What does that mean in practical terms? Frank asked. Bersan der Titso. It means that Mr. Owens has first call on the aquifer, and the HOA can't legally exclude him from water access. It also means that any changes to how the well operates, or any fees or restrictions the HOA wants to impose, need to be consistent with his senior rights in the terms of the easement. Right now, your HOA is operating as if it owns the water and controls who gets access. That's not legally accurate. You're operating under a permit that's subordinate to Mr. Owens's rights on land that he allows you to use. The room was silent. Brenda looked like she was trying to swallow a rock. "So what are you saying?" Patricia asked. "Are we operating illegally?" "Not illegally, but you're not structured correctly. The HOA is treating the well like a private utility that it controls, but it's actually a shared resource with Mr. Owens holding senior rights. That needs to be clarified and documented properly. I'm recommending that the HOA and Mr. Owens negotiate a formal agreement that acknowledges his senior rights, protects the easement, and establishes fair terms for shared management of the well. If they can't reach an agreement, the county may need to step in and impose one, or the matter could end up in court for formal adjudication." "How much would that cost?" Frank asked. "Court adjudication? Probably $50,000 to $100,000 in legal fees, and it would take at least 2 years. And based on the property records and water rights documentation, Mr. Owens would almost certainly win. So I'd strongly recommend negotiation over litigation." Another long silence. Then a man in the back stood up. He was younger than most of the crowd, maybe in his early 40s, and he looked tired. "I'm Dan McCarthy. My wife and I moved here 3 years ago. We bought this house because it was affordable and we liked the community. We're not interested in fights or lawsuits or legal fees. If Mr. Owens has the rights that Ms. Crane says he has, then we should acknowledge that and work out a fair arrangement. Fighting it seems like a waste of time and money." Several people nodded. A few others started talking at once, and Brenda banged her gavel again, but the energy in the room had shifted. People weren't angry anymore. They were worried about their property values and their bank accounts and whether they were about to get dragged into an expensive legal mess. Frank stood up again. "I move that we direct the board to negotiate with Mr. Owens to establish a formal water-sharing agreement that protects his senior rights and maintains fair access for all residents. Can I get a second?" "Second," Dan called out. "All in favor?" About 3/4 of the hands went up. Brenda didn't vote, and neither did Patricia or one of the other board members, but the motion carried easily. "Opposed?" A handful of hands, mostly from people sitting near Brenda. "Motion carries," Frank said. "Brenda, as president, you'll need to work with Mr. Owens and Ms. Crane to draft the agreement." "I won't do it," Brenda said flatly. "This is a betrayal of everything this board stands for. We're supposed to protect property values and maintain standards, not cave in to someone who refuses to follow the rules." "The rules don't apply to his property," Frank said. "Ms. Crane just explained that. I don't care what she explained. I'm not negotiating with him." The room erupted again, with people shouting questions and objections. Frank tried to restore order, but Brenda was already gathering her papers and walking toward the exit. She stopped next to where I was sitting and looked down at me with pure venom in her eyes. "You've destroyed this community," she hissed. "I hope you're proud of yourself." Then she left, and the meeting dissolved into chaos as people clustered in small groups, arguing and speculating. Jennifer worked her way through the crowd to where I was standing. "That went better than I expected," she said. "Really?" "Because it felt like a disaster." Brenda was always going to make a scene, but the membership voted to negotiate, which means the reasonable people won. Now, we just need to hammer out the details and get it documented properly. What happens with Brenda? That's up to the HOA. If she won't fulfill her duties as president, the board can remove her or the members can call for new elections. That's not really my problem. My problem is making sure the water rights are properly allocated and everyone has legal access. Over the next 2 weeks, Frank and I met 3 times with Jennifer to draft a water-sharing agreement. The document ended up being about 15 pages of legal language, but the core was simple. My property held senior rights to the aquifer. The easement allowed the HOA to maintain and operate distribution infrastructure across my land, and all residents would have fair access to the well as long as the system was properly maintained and operated within its permitted capacity. I agreed to pay a monthly water fee that covered my proportional share of maintenance and electricity costs, but I was explicitly exempted from HOA dues and covenant restrictions. The agreement also established a new well management committee that included me, 2 HOA board members, and a county technical advisor to ensure the system was operated sustainably. Brenda resigned as HOA president the day after the second meeting, citing health reasons. Patricia took over as interim president, and at the next election, Frank was voted in as the permanent replacement. The transition was smoother than I expected, and by mid-December, the new board had ratified the water sharing agreement and recorded it with the county. Jennifer and I had developed an easy working relationship through all of this. She was smart and direct, with a dry sense of humor that surfaced when she was explaining particularly arcane water regulations. I learned that she'd grown up in Colorado, studied hydrology at Colorado State, and moved to Arizona 10 years ago for a job with the State Water Resources Department before taking the county position. She lived alone in a house near downtown Kingman, had a dog named Copper, and spent her weekends hiking and photographing desert landscapes. "You should see the petroglyphs up at Grapevine Canyon," she said one afternoon when we were finishing up paperwork at the county office. "They're about 4,000 years old, all these bighorn sheep in geometric patterns. It's like standing in front of someone's journal from the Bronze Age." "I'd like that," I said. "I haven't explored much since I moved here. Been too busy fighting with my neighbors." "Well, now that's settled. You should get out more." We went the following Saturday, driving up through the Newberry Mountains to the narrow canyon where the ancient Patayan people had pecked their images into the dark volcanic rock. Jennifer knew the site well and pointed out details I would have missed, explaining the different artistic periods and what archaeologists had inferred about the people who'd lived here. We hiked for 3 hours, and she took dozens of photographs while I tried to imagine what this place had looked like 4,000 years ago when the climate was wetter and the springs ran year-round. "Water's what made all of this possible," Jennifer said as we sat on a boulder eating sandwiches. "The springs, the game, the plants, everything radiated out from water sources. You could map the entire human history of the Southwest just by tracking where water was reliable." "That hasn't changed much," I said. "We just have fancier infrastructure now." "Right. We pump it from hundreds of feet underground and move it through plastic pipes and treat it with chlorine, but we're still doing exactly what those Patayan people did. Finding water, protecting it, sharing it, it's the most fundamental human activity." We started spending more time together after that. Dinners in Kingman at a Mexican place she liked where the salsa was so hot it made my eyes water, and the owner treated her like family. A day trip to the Grand Canyon in January when the snow on the rim turned everything into a Christmas card. Long talks about geology and aquifers and the Colorado River Compact and how the Southwest was going to manage its water future as the climate shifted and the population kept growing. It was Jennifer who first mentioned that the community well was showing signs of declining pressure in late February. She'd been reviewing the quarterly monitoring reports that the HOA was now required to submit, and the static water level had dropped about 8 feet since the previous year. "It's not critical yet," she said when she called me. "But it's enough to warrant attention. Could be natural variation, or it could indicate that you're pulling more than the aquifer can sustain long term. I want to do a formal analysis." I drove over to the county office and reviewed the data with her. The decline was steady and consistent, not the kind of sharp drop you'd see from a mechanical failure or a sudden increase in pumping. That suggested the aquifer itself was under stress. "Are there any other wells in the area?" I asked. "Nothing significant. The closest is about 2 miles west, and it's just a domestic well for a single property. It shouldn't affect your system." "Then we're probably overdrawing. How many connections does the HOA have now?" Jennifer checked her records. 47 active accounts. That's up from 43 in November. "So 4 new connections in 3 months. If that trend continues, we'll have 55 or 60 households by next year. The well might not support that." "We need to do a pump test and update the aquifer analysis. I can bring in a contractor to handle the technical work, but it's going to cost a few $1,000s. Can the HOA afford that?" "They have reserve funds, and if they can't afford it, they need to figure it out because the alternative is running the aquifer dry and leaving everyone without water." Jennifer scheduled the pump test for mid-March, and I attended as the senior rights holder and a member of the well committee. The contractor ran the well continuously for 72 hours while monitoring the water level and recovery rate, and the results confirmed what we'd suspected. The aquifer could sustainably support about 45 to 50 connections at current usage rates, but beyond that, the recharge rate wasn't sufficient to maintain the water table. If the HOA kept adding connections without upgrading the system or finding additional sources, they'd deplete the aquifer within a decade. Frank called an emergency meeting to discuss the findings, and this time there was no drama or grandstanding. People listened quietly while the contractor explained the data, and then they asked practical questions about costs and options and timelines. "Can we drill deeper?" someone asked. "Possibly," the contractor said. "But you'd need to re-permit with the state, and there's no guarantee you'd find sufficient water at greater depth. The geology here is variable. You might hit good production, or you might hit dry rock." "What about conservation measures?" someone else suggested. "Restricting outdoor watering, upgrading to low-flow fixtures, that kind of thing?" "That would help," Jennifer said. "You could probably extend the sustainable capacity by 10 to 15% with aggressive conservation, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem if you keep adding new connections." "So we need to stop growing," Frank said. "Put a moratorium on new hookups until we have a long-term solution." The vote passed unanimously, and the board implemented a formal connection limit of 50 households. They also established a conservation program and started requiring water-efficient fixtures for all new construction and renovations. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it bought time for the community to figure out sustainable management. I ended up spending more time at the well house over the following months, working with Jennifer and a couple of technically minded residents to optimize the pump schedules and monitor the system performance. It turned out there was a lot of interest in the technical side once people understood the stakes. A retired electrical engineer named Tom Chen helped upgrade the controls to allow for off-peak pumping and automated monitoring. A woman named Sarah Johnson, who'd worked in municipal water treatment, designed a simple filtration system to improve water quality. We turned the well committee into something that actually mattered, and the community started taking real ownership of the resource they all depended on. By summer, the water table had stabilized, and the monitoring showed the aquifer was recovering slowly. Jennifer was pleased with the progress and said the county might use Desert Vista as a model for other small community systems in the area. "You've turned this into a success story," she told me one evening in June. "We were sitting on my porch watching the sunset, drinking iced tea and listening to the doves call from the junipers. 6 months ago, you had an out-of-control HOA, president trying to lock you out of your own water, and now you have a functional community managing a shared resource sustainably. That's not easy to pull off." "I had a lot of help," I said, "mostly from you. I was just doing my job." "You did a lot more than your job. You could have handled this with forms and legal notices and kept it all at arm's length. Instead, you showed up to meetings and helped draft agreements and spent your own time teaching people about water law. That matters." She smiled and looked out at the desert, which was turning gold and orange in the evening light. "I like this stuff. Water is what makes everything possible out here, and helping people understand how to manage it right feels important. Plus, I got to work with someone who actually knows what he's talking about. That's rare." "Is that a compliment?" "Don't let it go to your head. We'd been dancing around something for months, and I think both of us knew it. The easy conversations that lasted hours, the way we looked for excuses to spend time together, the comfortable silence that felt natural rather than awkward. I'd been married once, a long time ago, and it had ended badly enough that I'd spent the last 15 years telling myself I was better off alone. But sitting there with Jennifer, watching the light fade and the stars come out, I thought maybe I'd been wrong about that. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" I asked. "Not as colleagues or water committee members or any of that. Just dinner." She turned to look at me, and there was something in her expression that made my chest tight. "I thought you'd never ask." We went to a steakhouse in Kingman the following Saturday, and it was the kind of first date where you realize halfway through that this isn't just a first date, it's the beginning of something that's going to change your life. We talked about everything and nothing, and by the time dessert arrived, I was already thinking about second dates and third dates, and whether I was too old to be feeling this optimistic about the future. Over the next several months, we fell into an easy rhythm. Jennifer would drive out to my place after work a couple times a week, and we'd cook dinner together or sit on the porch talking until late. On weekends, we explored the backcountry, hiking up to old mine sites and hidden canyons and high desert mesas where you could see for 50 miles in every direction. She taught me about the administrative side of water management, and I taught her about aquifer geology and groundwater modeling. We were both people who'd spent our careers being competent and professional and self-sufficient, and finding someone who understood that world and shared that sensibility felt like a gift. The well committee continued to meet monthly through the summer and fall, and the aquifer monitoring showed steady improvement. By December, the water table had recovered most of the ground it had lost, and the system was operating comfortably within its sustainable capacity. Frank proposed dedicating the well house as a permanent community resource, with a plaque acknowledging the shared management agreement and the collaborative work that had saved the aquifer. He asked if I'd be willing to attend the ceremony and say a few words. "You're the reason any of this happened," he said. "If you hadn't stood your ground and insisted on clarifying the water rights, we'd probably still be running full speed toward depleting the aquifer. The community owes you." The dedication was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in mid-December, and about 30 people showed up, which was a good turnout for a community event that wasn't about conflict or crisis. The weather was cool and clear, and someone had strung lights around the well house and set up folding tables with cookies and coffee. Frank gave a short speech about the importance of sustainable resource management, and Sarah Johnson presented the monitoring data showing the aquifer recovery. Then Frank invited me to the podium. I'm not great at public speaking, but I tried to keep it simple and honest. I talked about how water's the foundation of everything in the desert, and how managing it right requires cooperation and understanding and a willingness to put facts ahead of egos. I thanked Frank and the committee members and all the residents who'd embraced conservation measures and supported the sustainable management plan. And I thanked Jennifer, who was standing in the back with her arms folded and a small smile on her face, for bringing clarity and professionalism to a situation that could have turned into a years-long legal nightmare. "Water doesn't care about property lines or HOA covenants or who was here first," I said. "It follows geology and gravity and the laws of physics. Our job as humans is to figure out how to share it fairly and use it wisely so that it's still here for the people who come after us. I think this community has done that, and I'm proud to be part of it." They unveiled the plaque, which was mounted on the well house wall next to the door. It read, "Desert Vista Community Well, dedicated December 2024, shared resource, shared responsibility, managed sustainably for present and future generations." After the ceremony, people clustered in small groups talking and eating cookies, and several came over to thank me personally. Tom Chen showed me some improvements he was planning for the pump controls. Sarah Johnson asked if I'd be interested in helping develop a rainwater harvesting system for the community center. Dan McCarthy introduced me to his wife and kids, and his oldest daughter asked questions about hydrogeology that suggested she'd been paying attention in science class. Jennifer appeared at my elbow with 2 cups of coffee. "You clean up nice," she said. "I didn't know you owned a tie." "I own 3 ties. This is the good one." "Well, you did good up there. People were listening." "They listened because you spent the last year teaching them why this matters. I just summarized the work you already did." She shook her head. "We did it together. That's kind of the point of all this, right? Nobody can manage water alone. It takes cooperation and expertise, and people willing to do the work even when it's complicated." We stood there, sipping coffee and watching the community celebrate something that 6 months ago had been a source of bitter conflict. The sun was dropping toward the mountains, and the light had that particular quality it gets in December when everything looks sharp and clear. I thought about how strange it was that a fight over water access had led to this, to a functional community and a sustainable system, and a woman standing next to me who made me think about futures instead of just getting through the day. "What are you thinking about?" Jennifer asked. "How weird life is. A year ago, I was just trying to fill my coffee pot and Brenda was locking me out of the well. Now we're standing here at a dedication ceremony for a shared water resource that actually works. It's surreal." That's what good outcomes look like when people choose cooperation over conflict, though I'll admit, Brenda made it interesting for a while there. Whatever happened to her, I haven't seen her around. She moved to Prescott last summer. I heard she joined the HOA board in her new subdivision within a month. God help them. Jennifer laughed, and we watched the sun drop below the horizon, turning the sky purple and orange and deep red. The lights around the well house came on automatically, and someone started playing music from a portable speaker. A few kids ran around chasing each other, and the adults talked in that relaxed way people do when they're not worried about conflict or crisis. You want to get out of here? Jennifer asked. I was thinking we could drive up to the overlook and watch the stars come out. That sounds perfect. We said our goodbyes and drove north out of the development, taking the dirt road that wound up into the foothills. The overlook was a flat spot about 1,000 feet above the valley floor, and from there you could see the lights of Kingman to the south and the dark bulk of the mountains to the north. We parked and got out, leaning against the truck bed and looking up at the sky as the first stars appeared. I'm thinking about applying for a state position, Jennifer said after a while. The Arizona Department of Water Resources is looking for a regional manager, and it would be a good step up in my career. More responsibility, better pay, more influence on policy. Where would you be based? Phoenix, probably. Maybe Flagstaff. They're still working out the details. I felt something sink in my chest. That's a long way from Kingman. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. I keep going back and forth on it. The job would be amazing, and it's the kind of opportunity that doesn't come along often. But I've built a life here. I like my house, I like my job, I like the people I work with. She didn't say the rest of it, but I heard it anyway. I like you, I like what we have, I don't want to lose that. You should take it if it's what you want, I said. I'm not going to be the reason you turn down a career opportunity. I know, but that doesn't make the decision easier. We stood there in the darkness, not touching but close enough that I could feel the warmth of her beside me. The stars were coming out thick and bright, the way they do in the desert when you're far from city lights. I thought about how water moves underground, following channels and fractures that were carved millions of years ago, finding its level and its path. People were like that too, I supposed. We followed the opportunities and obligations that shaped our lives, and sometimes those paths converged for a while, and sometimes they diverged. There wasn't much you could do about it except appreciate the convergence while it lasted. Don't decide tonight, I said finally. Think about it. Talk to the people in Phoenix, see what the job actually involves, then decide based on what's best for you, not what you think I want to hear. What do you want to hear? That you'll stay. But I'm 62 years old, Jennifer. I've learned enough to know that asking someone to give up their ambitions for me is a good way to end up alone and bitter. So I'm not going to ask that. She turned to face me. What if I want you to ask? Do you? I don't know. Maybe. I think I just want to know that what we have matters enough that you'd miss it if I left. I'd miss it more than I can explain, but that still doesn't mean you should stay if leaving is the right choice for your career. We were both quiet for a long time after that. The night was cold, and I could see my breath in the starlight. Finally, Jennifer moved closer and leaned against me, and I put my arm around her shoulders. I'll think about it, she said. I haven't even applied yet. Maybe I won't get it. Maybe it'll turn out to be a terrible fit, and I'll decide I'm happier where I am. But I need to at least explore it. Fair enough. We stayed at the overlook for another hour, watching satellites track across the sky and identifying constellations. When we finally drove back down to the valley, Jennifer followed me to my house and stayed the night, and in the morning we made breakfast together and didn't talk about Phoenix or career moves or any of the complicated things that were waiting in the future. Jennifer applied for the state position in January, and in February she flew to Phoenix for an interview. She was gone for 2 days, and when she came back, she seemed thoughtful and distant in a way that made me nervous. How did it go? I asked when she came over that evening. Good. Really good, actually. The team seems smart, and the work would be challenging in all the right ways. They're dealing with big picture stuff, interstate compacts and tribal water rights and long-term sustainability planning. It's the kind of work that could actually shape policy for the next 20 years. That sounds like something you'd be good at. Yeah. She sat down at my kitchen table and stared at her hands. They offered me the job. I'd start in April. There it was. I felt the floor drop out from under me, but I kept my voice steady. That's great, Jennifer. Congratulations. I haven't accepted yet. Why not? Because I keep thinking about what I'd be leaving behind. My house, my dog, this place. She looked up at me. You. Phoenix is 4 hours away. That's not the end of the world. It might as well be when we're both working full-time. We'd see each other maybe once a month if we're lucky, more likely every 6 weeks. That's not a relationship, Kyle. That's just two people who used to date and now send text messages occasionally. She wasn't wrong. I'd done enough long-distance situations in my career to know they rarely worked, especially when both people had demanding jobs. "So what do you want to do?" I asked. "I don't know. I'm asking you what you think." "I think you should take the job." "Just like that? You're not going to try to talk me out of it?" "What would you want me to say?" "Don't take a career opportunity you've worked toward your entire professional life because we've been dating for 8 months? That's not fair to you, and it's not fair to me either. If you stay and give up this job, 5 years from now you'll resent me for it. If you go and we can't make it work, at least you'll have the career you wanted." Jennifer's eyes were shining, and I realized she was close to crying. "I don't want to lose this. What we have, it's the first time in years I've felt like I found someone who actually gets me. Someone I don't have to explain myself to or apologize for caring about my work. Do you know how rare that is?" "I do. But I also know you can't build a life on asking someone to sacrifice their ambitions. That's not love, Jennifer. That's just fear." She was quiet for a long time, and then she wiped her eyes and laughed, though it came out shaky. "You're being way too reasonable about this. You're supposed to make a grand gesture and tell me you'll move to Phoenix with me or something. Would that help?" "I don't know. Maybe." I thought about it. I'd lived in this house for less than 2 years, and while I liked it, I wasn't particularly attached to the place in a way that meant I couldn't leave. My career was over, my retirement income was portable, and the whole reason I'd moved to Kingman was that I wanted space and quiet, and a chance to be somewhere interesting. Phoenix wasn't quiet, but it was definitely interesting, and the idea of starting over somewhere new with Jennifer was more appealing than staying here alone. "Okay," I said, "I'll come with you." Jennifer stared at me. "What?" "I'll move to Phoenix, or Flagstaff, or wherever you end up based. I'm retired. My income doesn't depend on where I live, and honestly, I moved here to get away from people. But now that I've found someone I actually want to spend time with, staying here alone seems pointless." "Kyle, that's crazy. You can't just uproot your entire life because I got a job offer." "Why not? It's my life. I get to decide what to do with it. And spending it with you sounds a lot better than spending it alone in the desert arguing with HOA presidents." "What about your property? Your water rights? The well committee?" "The water rights are recorded with the county. They'll stay with the property whether I'm here or not. If I sell, the new owner inherits them. The well committee has good people who know what they're doing. They don't need me hovering over their shoulder." "You're serious about this?" "Completely. Unless you don't want me tagging along, in which case I'll stay here and we can try the long-distance thing and see how it goes. But if you're asking if I'm willing to move so we can stay together, the answer is yes." Jennifer started crying for real then, and I got up and held her while she shook and laughed and cried at the same time. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her mascara was running, and she looked more beautiful than I'd ever seen her. "You're an idiot," she said. "I've been called worse. We barely know each other. 8 months is nothing. People don't make decisions like this after 8 months." "Some people do, and we know each other well enough. I know you're smart and competent and you care about doing your job right. I know you laugh at my jokes even when they're not funny. I know you like your coffee black and your salsa hot and you can identify 20 different raptor species by their flight patterns. That seems like enough to build on. What if it doesn't work out? Then we'll deal with it like adults and I'll find somewhere else to live. But I think it'll work out." She kissed me then, hard and desperate and full of all the things we hadn't said yet. When we finally came up for air, she was smiling. "Okay," she said, "let's do it. Let's move to Phoenix and see what happens. You should probably accept the job first. I'll call them tomorrow." We spent the next 2 months preparing for the move. I listed my property with a realtor, and to my surprise, it sold within 3 weeks to a young couple from California who were looking for space and water rights and didn't mind being part of an HOA that had finally learned how to function properly. The closing happened in mid-March, and I used the proceeds to buy a small house in Tempe with Jennifer, close enough to her new office that she could bike to work and far enough from downtown Phoenix that we still had views of the mountains. The well committee threw me a going-away party at the community center, and Frank gave a speech about how I'd saved the aquifer and taught them all about water management and helped turn Desert Vista into a model for sustainable community resource sharing. It was embarrassing and touching in equal measure, and several people hugged me and made me promise to visit. Tom Chen gave me a framed photograph of the well house with the dedication plaque, and Sarah Johnson presented me with a water quality analysis showing that the aquifer was healthier than it had been in 5 years. "You did good work here," Frank said as we stood outside watching the sunset one last time. "This community would have fallen apart if you hadn't stood your ground." "I think you're giving me too much credit. People just needed to understand the facts. Once they did, they made the right choices." "Maybe. But you were patient with us even when we didn't deserve it. Brenda was awful to you, and instead of punishing everyone by shutting down the well or demanding payments or any of the things you legally could have done, you worked with us to find a fair solution. That matters." I shook his hand and climbed into the truck where Jennifer was waiting. We drove away from Desert Vista Estates as the light faded and the stars came out, heading south toward our new life in the city. The first few months in Phoenix were an adjustment. The heat was more intense than Kingman, and the traffic was worse, and I missed the wide-open spaces and the silence of the high desert. But I liked waking up next to Jennifer every morning, and I liked having coffee on our small patio while she told me about the projects she was working on. I started consulting part-time with a groundwater engineering firm, doing aquifer modeling and water rights analysis for clients across the Southwest. The work kept my mind sharp and gave me an excuse to stay current with the research, and it turned out there was good demand for someone with my background and experience. Jennifer thrived in her new position. She was managing water rights adjudications and interstate compact negotiations and tribal consultation processes, working with teams across multiple states to try to build sustainable frameworks for the Colorado River and other shared water resources. It was exactly the kind of big-picture policy work she'd wanted, and watching her come alive with the challenges was its own reward. We settled into routines and rhythms, the small domestic patterns that make a life. Saturday morning hikes in the Superstition Mountains, Sunday evenings cooking elaborate dinners and watching the sunset over the city. Long conversations about hydrology and policy and whether the Southwest could actually sustain its current population as the climate shifted and the river flows declined. It wasn't the retirement I'd imagined when I left the USGS, but it was better than anything I'd planned. In May, we drove back to Kingman for the weekend to check on the well committee and visit the couple who'd bought my old property. They'd painted the house and put in a garden and seemed happy with their decision. The well was operating smoothly, and Tom showed me the monitoring data proving the aquifer was maintaining its recovery. Frank had been re-elected as HOA president, and the board had implemented a long-term sustainability plan that included conservation measures and infrastructure upgrades and a reserve fund for emergency repairs. "You built something good here," I told Frank. "This community is in better shape now than most systems twice its size. We had a good teacher in a crisis that forced us to pay attention. Sometimes that's what it takes." We had dinner that night at the Mexican place Jennifer liked, and the owner remembered us and asked where we'd been. When we explained about the move and the new job, he congratulated us and sent over free dessert. Walking back to our hotel, Jennifer took my hand. "Are you sorry you left?" she asked. "No, I miss the quiet sometimes, but I don't regret it. This feels right." "Even though you had to give up your property and your water rights and the life you'd built here?" "The property was just dirt and a house. The water rights protected the aquifer for everyone, not just me. And the life I thought I was building turned out to be a lot lonelier than I wanted to admit. Moving to Phoenix gave me something better." "What's that?" "You. Us. Whatever this is that we're building together." She smiled and leaned into me, and we walked back through the warm desert night, talking about where we might go hiking the next morning and whether the Kingman coffee shop would still have those cinnamon rolls she liked. The lawsuit came as a surprise. In late June, I received a certified letter from an attorney in Kingman informing me that Brenda Patterson was filing a civil action against me for damages related to my alleged interference with HOA governance and my role in forcing her resignation as president. The complaint claimed I'd engaged in a malicious campaign to undermine her authority, spread false information about water rights, and damaged her reputation in the community. She was seeking $50,000 in compensatory damages plus punitive damages to be determined by the court. I called Frank immediately. "Did you know about this?" "I just heard yesterday. Kyle, nobody here supports this. The board doesn't, the membership doesn't. This is all Brenda acting alone. Our attorney says it's completely frivolous and she'll get it thrown out, but you're still going to have to respond." This is insane. I didn't interfere with anything. I just clarified my legal water rights. I know, everyone knows. Brenda's been telling people in Prescott that she was forced out by a conspiracy, and apparently she's convinced herself that suing you will somehow vindicate her. It's not going to go anywhere. He was right. I hired an attorney in Kingman who specialized in HOA disputes, and she filed a motion to dismiss based on the fact that everything I had done was legally protected and supported by county water authorities. She also filed a counterclaim for malicious prosecution and attorney's fees. The judge threw out Brenda's lawsuit within 6 weeks and ordered her to pay my legal fees, which came to about $8,000. I heard through Frank that she'd filed for bankruptcy shortly after and moved back to California. "Good riddance," Jennifer said when I told her the news. "Some people never learn that you can't bully your way through life and expect no consequences." I almost feel sorry for her. She spent all that energy trying to control things she didn't understand, and in the end it cost her money and reputation and peace of mind. What a waste. You're more generous than I am. She tried to cut off your water and then sued you when you stood up for yourself. I'm fresh out of sympathy. Fair enough. We let it go and moved on with our lives. By fall, we'd fully settled into Phoenix, and I'd started to think about this as home rather than just a place we were trying out. Jennifer's work was going well, and my consulting practice was busy enough to keep me engaged without overwhelming me. We talked about traveling, maybe spending a winter in Mexico or taking a long trip through the Pacific Northwest. We talked about whether we wanted to get married or just keep living together as partners. We talked about what we'd do when we were too old to hike mountains and whether we'd stay in Arizona or move somewhere cooler. In December, we drove back to Kingman for the 1-year anniversary celebration of the well house dedication. The community had grown slightly, now up to 49 connected households, and the monitoring showed the aquifer was stable and healthy. Frank had commissioned a new information board that explained the geology of the local aquifer, the history of water rights in the area, and the sustainable management practices that kept the system functioning. My name was on the board along with Jennifer's and several other committee members, and there was a note thanking everyone who'd contributed to protecting the resource for future generations. The celebration was smaller than the previous year's dedication, but the mood was relaxed and happy. People came up to us throughout the afternoon to say hello and ask how we were doing in Phoenix. Tom Chen showed me upgrades to the pump system that reduced electricity costs by 20%. Sarah Johnson had been elected to the board and was working on a comprehensive conservation program that included rainwater harvesting and gray water recycling. Dan McCarthy's daughter was starting high school and talking about studying environmental science in college. As the sun started to set, Frank invited everyone to gather near the well house for a toast. He raised a glass of sparkling cider and spoke about the importance of community and cooperation and learning from challenges. A year ago, we dedicated this well house as a shared resource, and today I'm proud to report that it's operating better than ever. Our aquifer is healthy, our system is sustainable, our community is stronger because we learned to work together instead of fighting each other. I want to thank everyone who contributed to that success, especially Kyle Owens and Jennifer Crane, who taught us that good water management isn't about control or power or who was here first. It's about understanding the resource, respecting the law, and finding fair solutions that work for everyone. People clapped and drank their cider, and I felt Jennifer squeeze my hand. We stayed until the stars came out, talking with people and enjoying the cool desert evening. When we finally said our goodbyes and headed back to our hotel, I looked back at the well house with its lights and its dedication plaque and the people gathered around it, and I thought about how strange and unpredictable life could be. A year and a half ago, I'd been standing in my kitchen watching my tap run dry, angry and frustrated and ready for a fight. Now I was driving away from a community that had learned to function properly, heading back to a city where I'd built a new life with someone I loved, and the whole journey had started because Brenda Patterson put a padlock on a gate. "What are you thinking about?" Jennifer asked as we merged onto the highway. "Water, and how everything connects to it. If you trace any conflict or cooperation back far enough, you usually find water at the root. That's very philosophical. I'm a philosophical guy. You're a guy who spent 35 years measuring aquifer levels, and now you're trying to sound deep. Can I be both? She laughed and turned up the music, and we drove south through the night toward home, leaving the well house and Desert Vista estates behind us, like a completed chapter in a larger story that was still being written.